Hello.
Ian.
Come in.
Good to see you.
Owl, you are everywhere.
Thank you for having us in. Thank you so much. How do you come up with a private eye cover like those?
Well, this was when Theresa May, who do you remember her? She was around at the beginning of the year. She used to be Prime Minister. Anyway, she left, and we had to think, how can we pay tribute to Mrs May? So I thought perhaps a blank page would be good, and so we have the Theresa May memorial issue, her legacy in full. And so I think what I'm saying, thank you. Which again seems quite cruel, but was quite funny.
Do you know how each of those? Do you ever keep tabs on how each of those sell? Do you know?
Yeah, that was a seller. I'm afraid that was popular.
And Nigel Farage?
Nigel Farage, this is great. I mean, he's always good. Partly because he always does photo opportunities. So having been accused of having a party full of fruitcakes, he does a photo op eating a fruitcake. I mean, it is fantastic. I mean, he does the joke for us.
Boris Johnson's private life has frequently furnished you with cover ideas, and this time you had a pretty busy one with Jennifer Arcuri.
Yes, this was a sort of essentially a smut special because I mean there was a proper public interest in this story in that public money had gone to this woman who dances around a lap dancing pole, but essentially the joke was that Boris had yet again been caught out. He's saying I need some technology lessons, and she's saying floppy disk or hard drive. And then there's a proper joke here with Boris saying to his new girlfriend Carrie, I don't lie to women anymore, and she's saying except the Queen, obviously. And that's not a legal problem. That's the Supreme Court judgment. So you know, this is our job, reporting the facts.
And you sometimes jump on anniversaries too.
Yes, this is when Boris became Prime Minister, which many people equate with an event as unlikely as landing on the moon, but he did. And there's this brilliant picture of him just going into number 10. So we did it as the Loon Landing, a souvenir issue, one small step for man and a giant leap in the dark for mankind. And put it in black and white.
And in terms of your annual, when you've got a year to get through, you've done many of these annuals, of course. When you've got to curate a year, which is what you were saying a moment ago, is what journalism is about. What's your starting point with thinking about how we do all this? Do you just think let's get the best jokes, or do you think we need to really reflect the year?
I try and get the best jokes, and if we've been dull about a particular subject or haven't covered it well, I try and leave it out. I mean, we're exhaustive, but the idea is to be entertaining.
You've been personally committed, haven't you, to trying to reverse the decline of the English cartoonist.
Yes.
Why have you and Private Eye kept up your investment in cartoons?
Because people like them and the mag sells. No, obviously it's a much more elevated reason than that. No, I love cartoons, and I think that one of the things that print can do is reproduce sort of beautiful drawings that are funny. And English cartooning tradition is very old, and I think absolutely remarkable. So I doubled the number of cartoons. And people said, well, you know, there aren't any, you know, young cartoonists, you won't get anyone. It's funny, if you offer money, people become cartoonists. And we've got a brilliant raft of young cartoonists. I mean, this is a genuine skill, and there are lots of people who do it really well.
I mentioned politics, which is what most of your covers are about. Now we seem to be in an age of polarisation, don't we, and genuine differences. Why has that happened, do you think? Is it the delayed effects of a financial crash?
I think the referendum was a question about, you know, whether you're essentially happy with the way Britain is or not, whether you think it's too unequal, whether you think you've been left behind by the international world that has come into business, whether you would rather your life was structured different ways. In the end, for me, it wasn't really about Europe at all. I mean, the question that people answered was a question about themselves. It's perfectly reasonable, but it didn't have anything to do with the EU. So we managed to politicise essentially a cultural divide, which is why we've ended up with 3 years of people shouting at each other.
And interestingly, the last 3 years has furnished your covers with some very loud characters. What does that do for satire, though? Does satire become easier or harder when you have these stranger-than-life characters?
Well, I mean, it does two things. One is everybody says to you, oh, well, satire's over now, because you can't satirise Trump. I mean, he's doing it to himself. Or, you know, Boris is funny. You know, there's nothing more to add. Which isn't true. B, you have to work harder, because you have to find the areas where they're vulnerable, the areas where they genuinely are funny, and where you can get under their skin. Obviously, it's incredibly flattering where we'd done some joke about Trump, which turned up in a tweet saying this was sort of unfunny and not clever and not funny, and that's the ultimate prize. And to find that Boris is furious by something, that's what you want.
Does he ever get in touch? Does people ever get in touch? I mean, he's blessed your cover many, many, many times. Do you think Boris is still cheesed off when he sees himself, perhaps with Jennifer Arcuri on your front page?
Oh, I do hope so.
What's your technique for dealing with people who are readily offended online?
Well, I'm not online, which helps.
Have you found that that's hard to sustain over the course of the development of the internet? You've got two children in their 20s. I mean, what do they think about the fact that Dad's not online?
I've no idea. I mean, presumably because I haven't looked online. No, it's very restful. I do recommend it.
I think I could get used to that idea. Unfortunately, the BBC's media editor may not be allowed to do that. One of the things about the age in which we live is that the truth seems up for grabs in a way that it has been for a long time, maybe not ever in the course of your career. Do you think it's fair to say that these days the penalty or sanction faced by those caught lying has almost disappeared? There are people getting away with lying as never before.
I mean, I do think it's a real problem now. I mean, the idea of fake news, and that's one of the things that is why I don't spend a lot of time online, because I'm infuriated by, perfectly reasonable people who say to me, I noticed you didn't run that story about Hillary Clinton murdering everybody. And I said, well, I didn't run it because it isn't true. And they said, well, look, I read it online. And these are people who, they say to you, the mainstream media, Ian, is just full of lies. And then they believe the biggest and stupidest lie that someone in a bedroom has written up on the internet and sent out as a blog. I mean, there's a real divide between a sort of supposedly sort of scepticism, a sort of fierce refusal to believe anything you read in the normal media, and then believing almost anything you read online. And this is weird. And it makes the idea of truth polluted, which, as we know from the history of fake news, this is what the original Putin doctrine was, and this is what Trump wants. He doesn't want you to believe this rubbish he pumps out. He wants you to believe nothing.
And yet, I know that people watching this on the BBC or listening to this via a BBC podcast will think that actually the BBC is part of the problem. That there is, these days, if you want to go viral, you say that there's a conspiracy of silence at the BBC. Whether or not there is one or not, why are people so keen to believe conspiracy theories about a cover-up by journalists? In other words, why is trust in journalism so low?
Well, I mean, we haven't distinguished ourselves over the last 20 years. I mean, the phone hacking thing wasn't good. The Levison inquiry was not marvellous. So, I mean, there is a reason for people to be slightly sceptical about journalism. But it is in much the same way as the expenses scandal made people very sceptical about politicians. What I believe is that, and I have said this before, but that being sceptical is not the same as being cynical. It doesn't mean you believe in nothing. You try and assess and evaluate. And there is plenty of really good journalism going on. And the alternative is literally sitting at home thinking, I wonder what I believe.
Isn't the really striking thing about the election campaign that we saw at the end of 2019 that a lot of the fake news was actually pumped out by official channels? It was actually coming from the main parties. Isn't that really where fake news is? And isn't that just old-fashioned political spin?
I think the thing that really shocked everyone in that political campaign was not the idea that hidden on the internet somewhere there were messages going out that weren't being paid for and we didn't know about. I mean, that's perfectly reasonable to criticise. It was the fact that political parties were pretending they were fact-checking outputs or were pretending they were other outfits in order just to pump out their own messages. Now, old-fashioned political spin is, we're the Tory party, we're going to promise you 80,000 more trees, houses, nurses, whatever it is. We're the Labour Party. No, we've got 80,000 and another 80,000 nurses, trees, etc. I mean, that's old-fashioned political spin. That's what people know about. Fake messaging, and then when you get caught out, you say, oh, it was a joke. Oh, it's satire. No, isn't that satire? We're doing bloody satire. Get the Tory party out of it.
You said in the past you don't talk much about your voting habits, but you said you're a Democrat and you believe in democracy.
Yeah.
As you look around the world, do you think that we're in a sort of period of democratic recession, which is just a correction where things are being readjusted, but democracy will survive? Or do you actually think we're at the start of something darker, which is a post-democratic age?
No, I mean, I don't believe that, but then I am, on the whole, quite optimistic. I mean, we are in the middle of a cult of the strong man, and a lot of leadership around the world is very autocratic, and populist movements have, I think, done democracy no favours in forgetting the normal checks and balances and the structures and sort of boring sets of standards and values that allow democracy to function. So none of that is very encouraging. But essentially, I think most periods, and it's one of the good things about getting older, think this is a terrible time. And British politics has never been so divisive. And then I think, poll tax riots. What about the miners' strike? I don't remember that being a very cohesive period in British politics. And, you know, I was my mother-in-law who said to me, I've never been so worried as I am now about the world. And I said, you were a teenager in 1939. And she said, oh, yes, so I was. I do think you have to keep a certain amount of perspective.
I'm just conscious, as I say, is that I have not talked about the fact that behind you are endless letters. In terms of the threats that you've had this year,
yes,
legal and otherwise, you've had many a legal letter over the course of your career.
Yeah.
How does this year kind of rank in terms of the threats to ruin you and your family's welfare?
It's interesting. I think that's another thing about Brexit. People must be, you know, a bit more depressed. We've had quite a lot of very, very rich people suing.
What sort of stuff?
Mostly Russian, or thereabouts, about money and why it's in London and where it's going to. So we've had quite a lot of that.
Is there ever any danger that these cases are going to end up bankrupting you and Private Eye?
Well, I have a wooden table. I mean, we'll see. I mean, we survive on the favour of our readers. They pay up. That's where our money comes from. And you know, most of our stories about unexplained wealth. You know where ours is from. We don't know where theirs is from. So that's the difference.
Ian Hislop, thank you very much indeed.